have people dying almost every single day, and people do nothing. My aunt is one of the murdered and missing Indigenous women, you know, and I'm burying my loved ones on a regular basis that I shouldn't be burying, mostly because of people's indifference.
Woo! Look at all the people! Look at them!
Karen Joseph has been working for months to make this day happen. Actually, it's probably more accurate to say that she's been working on this her whole life.
Namuyut, we are one.
The idea behind the Walk for Reconciliation is as lofty as it is simple: to honor the survivors of residential schools and to get non-Indigenous people to take part in reconciliation by walking alongside them.
So let the walk begin.
The question I'm thinking about is this: given the history between Indigenous people and the rest of Canada, what kind of reconciliation is even possible?
Okay, let's go!
I'd like to express my gratitude to each of you for joining us this evening. I know
A few days before the walk is volunteer night, and Karen takes the mic to thank them.
You know, this is something that my father asked us to do, and I'm always overwhelmed at the amount of love and contribution people are willing to have.
Listening to Karen, you can't help but feel it, how deeply personal reconciliation is for her. How much does the walk matter to you?
A lot, a whole lot.
How come?
Because I have the daily realities of being Indigenous in this country, and all that goes with that, and
What do you mean?
just the suicides, the deaths, the early unnecessary death. I want for our people to move forward from that. So I lift my hands in thanks and praise to you.
Move forward doesn't mean forget. Karen knows firsthand that the root of many of the problems facing Indigenous people in Canada stem from residential schools.
Oh, I like your moose hide.
Karen's father, Chief Robert Joseph, was sent to St. Michael's Residential School on Vancouver Island. He was one of 150,000 kids across the country who were taken away from their families. But the incredible thing is, despite that, he's the one pushing for reconciliation. In fact, the walk was his idea. You were 6 years old when you went to residential schools. You stayed there for 11 years. What do you remember?
I don't like to remember, but I remember just about all of the horrific things that ever happened to me. As a little boy, the first year I was there at 6 years old, I was sexually abused, and it was a brutal environment in the classroom too. You couldn't speak Kwakwala, the language I grew up in, and so it was an infraction every time you didn't follow an order or an instruction, and they would strap you by every conceivable means. Anything they could grab hold of, a ruler, a leather strap, a pointer, whatever it was, or drag you around by the ear and stand you up in the corner for hours and denigrate your humanity. And you never forget those things, because I grew up feeling that way, accepting that I was nothing and nobody cared, nobody loved me.
Somehow Chief Joseph made it to 18 and graduated, if you can call it that.
I got to the front of the stairs of that residential school, and I looked out, and it suddenly hit me. I had nowhere to go. I had no sense of value, no sense of purpose. I had no skill set, and I'm standing there, and I'm going to walk away from that place to where? Rather than being inspired like most young people who are graduating to want to be something, to dream things, I was just in total despair at the top of those steps.
I can't imagine how a person could deal with that. And for Chief Joseph at the time, the only thing he could come up with was to have a family.
In those schools, you're so lonely. I had made up literally in my mind that I would get married, have kids, and I'd never be lonely again. So I did that. I didn't know you're supposed to learn how to nurture relationships or bring up kids.
Chief Joseph had 5 children, but having kids didn't solve his problems.
For a long time in my life, I spiraled downward. I was an alcoholic. First drink I ever took was when I was 14 years old, and I could never hold a drink. And I drank too much because it helped me in those early days to at least forget for a little while some of the torment that I carried with me about my experience in those residential schools. And just one day I drank too much and lost my job, and my family walked out on me. I had my wife and my 5 kids, and so I lost them.
And you realize how residential school didn't just hurt Chief Joseph, it hurt his whole family.
We're going to get lots of people.
I've always loved my father. That isn't to say that he was a good father. I mean, he just wasn't there as a kid, for us as a kid. He just wasn't. I mean, he knew from school that his job was to put food on the table and a roof over our head, and beyond that, he's done.
So how'd that feel as a kid?
Well, I mean, you're vulnerable then, right? I mean, I got really hurt as a result of that. Most of my siblings got really hurt as a result of there's lots of predators out there, and First Nations kids are a good target. So
he wasn't there to protect you?
He wasn't there, yeah. Yeah, he wasn't there. And I don't think he knew to be there because of his own experience, right?
But the incredible thing is, Chief Joseph turned his life around. I mean, it's cliche to say it was against all odds, but it really was. It took him years to get better, but one day he returned home. And what he tried to do was reconcile with his own family.
So finally one day my dad came home and said, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to talk about how we feel. And nobody's allowed to leave this table until you tell us how you feel. So I think we were having cereal, because I remember having the spoon and like, what? And I'm going to start, he said.
I said, all right, everybody, kids, every day now, when we sit around this table at breakfast, we're going to do a check-in. And you're going to tell me how you feel, you're going to tell me how you feel, and we're going to figure out how we can help each other. I know it hurts. So maybe the seeds of reconciliation started from that moment, you know.
It worked for the Joseph family. And so they thought reconciliation could work for other people too. Even bring together Indigenous people in the rest of the country. Which brings us to the walk.
Are you guys printing site maps?
But with the walk just 48 hours away, there's still plenty to do.
Is there access to the front of the gate?
Karen and her team figure out the final details.
Yeah.
We got a schedule, hey?
We'll see you on Sunday morning?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, this is teamwork, man. This is all teamwork.
In Canada, we're always going to disagree. We're always going to have different opinions. We're always going to have different perspectives. And I think we have to talk to one another. We, as Indigenous people, cannot do this alone. I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's possible. And so if we want to change Canada, we need everybody's help to do that.
When I was holding their hands, these little children, it reminded me of my time when I was in a residential school and nobody held your hand. Nobody was saying you're valuable, you're precious, let's walk together. I thought about what they must be thinking to lead this walk of thousands and thousands of people. They're going to remember that for the rest of their lives, and they're going to be inspired by that memory.
Watching Karen and her dad, I can't help but think how remarkable it is that they were able to reconcile. Of course, it'd be a fairy tale to say that that means that the rest of the country can do it too. But But maybe their walk proves that at least there's hope. Nick Purdon, CBC News, Vancouver.